The defense may get all the evidence in the case, a superseding indictment may be on the horizon, and that's it for trying to get bail? We're breaking down some of the recent major updates in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, it is time once again to do a kind of reassessment of where we are right now in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal case. So many things happen at such a fast pace. Now, if you haven't been following the day-to-day of this criminal case, we've got some recent updates for you. And to start, I will tell you, I was actually doing a live stream of a Diddy hearing the other day on our Law&Crime YouTube channel, and we take questions from our viewers, and they're great questions, by the way. We love when you guys submit the questions. But we took a question from one of our YouTubers, and it was something as simple as, what's going on with Diddy? I haven't really been following it. And I thought about that. We do so many stories here on Sidebar about this guy. Sometimes I just assume most of you know what's been going on from the very beginning, but the truth is many don't. And his charges are not so easy to understand. They're kind of complicated. They're not so straightforward. So let me briefly set the stage about what he's charged with and how we got here. So Sean Combs, the music mogul, the multimillionaire, he was arrested in September out in New York by federal authorities. And this wasn't a surprise to us. Why? Because after his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura, filed her bombshell lawsuit against him in November of 2023, accusing him of sexually, verbally, emotionally, and psychologically abusing her over their relationship that lasted years, that was the start of many lawsuits to come against Sean Combs. And by the way, he was just sued by 3 men who said that they were assaulted by him as well. Now, what happened after we saw the beginning of all these lawsuits? 2 of his properties in March of 2024 were raided by federal agents who, confiscated guns and digital and physical evidence. In May, CNN published a video of Combs purportedly beating Cassandra Ventura in a hotel hallway from back in 2016. This surveillance footage apparently captures him running down a hallway in a towel and kicking, punching, and dragging her. And then 2 days after that video is published, he ends up apologizing in an Instagram video. Then, September, he's arrested out in New York and he was charged with 3 federal crimes: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. I think the best way to explain what he's being charged with is how it's described in his criminal indictment, namely that he allegedly abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Combs and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise wielded the power and prestige of Combs' role at the Combs businesses to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs' orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers that Combs referred to as, among other things, freak-offs. Freak-offs were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, pleasured himself during, and often electronically recorded. In arranging these freak-offs, Combs, with the assistance of members and associates of the Combs enterprise, transported and caused to be transported commercial sex workers across state lines and internationally. Freak-offs occurred regularly, sometimes lasted multiple days, and often involved multiple commercial sex workers. During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes, unbeknownst to victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial sex workers. After freak-offs, Combs and the victims typically received IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. So that essentially is what we're talking about. And since his arrest, he has been detained at the Metropolitan Detention Center out in Brooklyn, New York. By the way, as you can see with how we cover stories like Diddy, we just try to call balls and strikes, just try to give you the facts, sober analysis, and that is why we're thrilled to partner with a company like Straight Arrow News. So this is an app and website that is focused on objective, unbiased reporting. As somebody who's always doing research for SIDEBAR, I get it. I know how easy it is to get lost in biased journalism. Well, Straight Arrow News helps us cut through that with tools like the Media Landscape, which shows where outlets fall on the political spectrum, or the Media Mist tool, highlighting stories that mainstream media might be skipping. So check it out for yourself for free. Use the tools that we use to research at san.com/sidebar, or click the link in the description. And supporting them means supporting journalists like us who are committed to delivering the truth. Okay, all that in mind, let's talk now about some recent updates in the criminal case. So I want to start with what happened just a few days ago, because Combs had this pretrial hearing in federal court in front of Judge Arun Subramanian, the current judge overseeing this case. And the prosecution indicated to the court that they plan to turn over all evidence to the defense by the end of the year. So what is that, just less than 2 weeks? Now, the government, in a letter to the court in anticipation of this hearing, they did have a little caveat. They said certain discovery, however, may be produced after that date. For example, due to technological limitations, the government has not yet been able to extract every electronic device seized. To the extent that the ongoing efforts to extract the devices are successful, those extractions will be produced promptly. Moreover, as noted previously, the government's investigation is ongoing, and the government will continue to produce discoverable material as it is received on a rolling basis. This may include, among other things, records received in response to outstanding or new subpoenas or other legal process. Now, I have to put this in perspective for a minute. The prosecution has indicated that there is a mountain of evidence in this case. And when you're talking a racketeering case that is apparently, allegations are stemming from 2008, 2009 to 2024, there's a lot of stuff here, and it can get complicated. And particularly digital evidence. I mean, in this case, Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson, one of the prosecutors, said back in October that and this was during the early stages of this case, as per reporting by PBS, 96 electronic devices were seized during these raids on Sean Combs' properties, and that 8 devices contained over 90 terabytes of information. Now, not all of it might be relevant to the case, but that is a lot to go through. But even in a filing last month, Combs' defense team said that the productions that were turned over to them by the prosecution have been voluminous, and they confirm that the government, quote, has turned over many terabytes of data, including search warrant affidavits. Think about how much material that is. So when you think about that, when you think about how much material has been turned over to the defense, and maybe will still have to be turned over, it is still amazing to me that the defense will be ready for a May 2025 trial. But I tell you what, just keep that in mind. Keep that date in mind for a second. Now, during this hearing this week, there has also been a discussion about Brady material. Now, Brady material is relevant evidence that is favorable to the defense, potentially exculpatory evidence, tending to prove a defendant did not commit the crime. And this is evidence that the prosecution finds out about and has to turn over to the defense. And in their joint letter to the court in anticipation of this hearing this week, the defense argued, quote, that the Brady disclosures failed to meet the minimum constitutional standards to which Mr. Combs is entitled. And so during the hearing, Judge Subramanian asked the prosecution, can you tell me how you're complying with the Brady obligations? To which Assistant United States Attorney Emily Johnson reportedly responded that they are endeavoring to get the defense the information they're requesting, including interrogations the prosecution conducted, and also told the court that they had given the defense files from Victim 1. Now, based on the description of Victim 1 in the indictment and prosecution filings, this is the victim, by the way, who makes up the sex trafficking charge, I think a fair argument would be that is probably Cassandra Ventura. So when there is a discussion of turning over evidence regarding Victim 1, potentially Cassandra Ventura, and exculpatory evidence regarding Victim 1, I have to wonder if this relates back to the argument presented by the defense over the past several months that there is no evidence that Victim 1 is a victim of sex trafficking, rather that she and Combs had this consensual, years-long, toxic, violent relationship. And when you look at the 2016 video that I mentioned before, the defense would say this is not evidence that he was sex trafficking her, but this was just a very unfortunate, disturbing domestic spat. Now, the prosecutors have asserted that there was a sex worker in that hotel room that she was allegedly escaping from, and so this is a prime example of sex trafficking. But going back to what this exculpatory information might be regarding victim one, Combs' lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, seemed to confirm that in this hearing, this might be what's going on, because he apparently said to the judge, if what happened in Mr. Combs' bedroom was found to be entirely personal, we'd view that as subject to Brady. Now, to be clear, we don't know exactly what exculpatory Brady material is being referred to, but I think a fair assessment would be if they're trying to say that everything was consensual, maybe toxic, but consensual between Cassandra Ventura or victim one and Sean Combs, that's exculpatory. Okay, moving on. Also in this hearing, there was an important discussion about a superseding indictment. You see, it's been reported that the prosecutors here have been presenting evidence to a grand jury and that this investigation is ongoing. So it is possible that Combs could be hit with new or amended charges. And so Judge Subramanian asked AUSA Johnson more about this. The judge asked, what can you tell me about your ongoing investigation and any superseding indictment? Now, AUSA Johnson reportedly replied, I can't say much. We're mindful of the trial date, and any additional charges will have little discovery information? Huh. What does that mean? Does it seem to suggest that if we bring charges, it wouldn't make a major change in the case? Maybe suggesting it wouldn't necessarily require a change in the trial date? So is it possible that means just maybe, I don't know, amending the racketeering charge to add more evidence? So does that mean maybe just adding additional supporting evidence to, let's say, the racketeering charge that is so widespread or overarching? Because the racketeering charge has a number of underlying crimes. I mentioned before, forced labor, kidnapping, obstruction, bribery. And so maybe they're just going to amend it with additional information. It's hard to say. I mean, prosecutors have alleged that they have evidence that Combs engaged in further acts of obstruction while he's been locked up in the MDC after his arrest, after the indictment, namely allegedly paying to use other inmates' phone access accounts, using three-way phone calls to contact people not approved on his contact list, evidence that he told his family to contact potential victims and witnesses in this case. So if they are going to now amend the indictment to include this, is that a possibility? Is that maybe why it won't change the structure of the case? It's not like an additional charge per se. Or maybe they say, look, we know there's a trial date, we get it, but that may change. I mean, we keep wondering if Combs is going to be hit with charges with respect to minors, since that is the basis of a lot of the civil lawsuits that he's currently facing since he was first criminally charged. And if they do end up charging him criminally at the federal level with respect to minors, that, I have to imagine, would include a lot more discovery, would change the whole tenor of this case, would change his entire defense strategy. But honestly, tough to say what to make from those remarks. Now, moving back to Combs' lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, he asked during this hearing that the racketeering charge, he said, is very vague, and that the prosecution, what they're alleging with multiple acts of arson and kidnapping, but he said it wasn't clear what events they're referring to. And he even suggested we anticipate a motion for a bill of particulars coming to the court. Now, a bill of particulars is when a defendant says to the government, look, I need some more clarity on my charges. Itemize it out for me. I need more details of each charge so I can properly understand the case and defend against it. And it's a way for a defendant to avoid being surprised at trial. And by the way, Combs' defense has asked for this before at another point in this case, including wanting to know the names of the victims in this case. So we'll see if they get a little bit more clarity or ask for more clarity about what the charges are. By the way, when Agnifilo talks about arson and kidnapping, in one of the government's first letters to the court at the very beginning of this case in September, they kind of explain what this is. They write, in the early morning hours of December 22nd, 2011, the defendant and a co-conspirator kidnapped an individual at gunpoint to facilitate breaking into and entering the residence of another individual one. Multiple witnesses would testify at trial to the events surrounding the kidnapping and break-in, the latter of which is corroborated by police reports and other records. Approximately 2 weeks later, the defendant's co-conspirators set fire to individual one's vehicle by slicing open the car's convertible top and dropping a Molotov cocktail inside the interior. Police and fire department reports extensively document the arson and conclude that the fire was intentionally set. Multiple witnesses would also testify to the defendant bragging about his role in destroying individual one's car. And we believe this is actually in reference to rapper Kid Cudi, because this description is almost identical to what has been alleged in another lawsuit against Sean Combs. I believe it was the Cassandra Ventura lawsuit, where she said that Combs took this revenge out on the rapper because of him being romantically linked to her. All right, so moving on, the judge concluded the hearing by scheduling the next hearing for March 17th, meaning we may not see or hear from Sean Combs for quite some time as he sits behind bars in the MDC. Now, to be fair, we haven't really seen him with our own eyes. There's been courtroom sketches, but I will tell you this, talking about seeing and hearing from Sean Combs, Law&Crime's very own Elizabeth Milner was inside that courtroom for this hearing, and she relayed to us how Combs looked.
So when Diddy came inside, it was still that standard issued MDC jumpsuit. He's wearing khaki. From that video of, I think that was obtained by Daily Mail back in September, of Diddy playing hacky sack in Central Park, to now he appeared just astonishingly thinner, which you can expect to be inside a federal detention center for a couple months now. A lot different from the luxury lifestyle that he was living before, but he appeared very noticeably thinner, and maybe being locked up in detention is starting to wear on him. He appeared grayer a little bit as well too, but again, he appeared just like how you would expect Diddy to appear for a hearing.
First of all, I got to call out Elizabeth here because her reporting on this was picked up by the press. A lot of outlets quoted her description of Diddy, so great reporting by her. But also, it's interesting hearing the way that he looked considering what he reportedly said in court too. According to ABC, Combs reportedly said to those in the court, "Happy holidays, y'all." He was also apparently polite to the judge, asking, "Good afternoon, how are you doing today?" So seemingly a positive attitude considering he's locked up for the foreseeable future and, may not be doing great behind bars. Which, by the way, we have an update on that as well. So after Judge Subramanian became the latest judge to deny Sean Combs bail, denying him pretrial release, Combs, by the way, still had the option to appeal that decision to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But in a recent filing, his team wrote, "Mr. Combs does not seek to appeal the district court's denial of his renewed motion and hereby moves to voluntarily dismiss the appeal." So it seems he has given up trying to be released. He has given up trying to fight for bail. And I think a fair argument for why he would do that would be he probably realized it wouldn't be successful after so many judges all concluded the same thing. And given the fact that his trial is basically just around the corner, I mean, May will be here before you know it. And there is such an enormous amount of evidence to review, like I mentioned, maybe let's not spend the time and money trying to fight a non-winnable argument, right? Let's focus on my legal defense, not bail. It's not happening for me. And by the way, why did Judge Subramanian recently, last month, become the latest judge to deny him bail? Well, as Judge Subramanian wrote in his order, the court finds that the government has shown by clear and convincing evidence, so it's a lower standard, that no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the safety of the community. So first, he says, aside from all the heinous allegations in the indictment, Subramanian, he cites the 2016 videotape as evidence of Combs' violence and his dangerousness. This is important in a bail analysis. Second, Subramanian ruled that Combs presents a serious risk of witness tampering, like improperly contacting a grand jury witness and trying to cover it up. Third, Subramanian says that Combs violated the Bureau of Prisons regulations in the MDC when he was making these three-way phone calls or using other inmates' phone access codes. He broke the rules while in the MDC while he was seeking bail, and when he knew the government had already alleged he was reaching out to witnesses and engaging in obstructive conduct, yet Subramanian says he does this. Fourth, this was interesting, Subramanian actually took issue with what he perceived to be Sean Combs' lawyers misrepresenting to the court about whether or not Combs' legal pads in his jail unit were actually labeled legal or not. This was with respect to a separate inquiry on whether his rights were violated when photos were taken of those legal pads. It seemed to be the suggestion that the defense might not have been so accurate about when or if those pads were labeled legal or not, so it's a bit of a problem there. Fifth, even though Sean Combs presented a bail package of $50 million and private security to monitor him on house arrest, Judge Subramanian wrote, the court doubts the sufficiency of any conditions that place trust in Combs and individuals in his employ, like a private security detail, to follow those conditions. So in other words, he might influence that security detail. They can't be trusted either. And here's the final point. Combs is in a different position than Mike Jeffries, the former CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, who was also recently arrested and charged with federal sex trafficking crimes in New York. Why? The issue with Jeffries was that he was less a danger on the outside versus a flight risk, and he had no criminal history. And the allegations there stemmed from a decade ago, and he's 80 years old, and there's no RICO or racketeering allegation. So he really can't be compared with Sean Combs. There's no way to ensure Combs wouldn't be a danger on the outside or essentially follow the rules. That's the bottom line. Okay, so now that he's locked up, it does seem clear there's one thing he's probably going to do, and that is review evidence in this case. That leads me to another update here. So you remember there was this whole back and forth about how and when Combs could use a laptop to review evidence while he's locked up at the MDC. Well, Judge Subramanian recently ordered that the MDC must give Combs access to the Discovery laptop 7 days per week from 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. This can be in his unit's visiting room or in his unit's VTC room, the video teleconference room. And the purpose, by the way, of this Discovery laptop, the judge said, is to review discovery, not to take or store notes. And Judge Subramanian wrote that it's the court's understanding that the laptop has been preloaded with discovery materials, but does not allow any functionality beyond reviewing those materials. If defendant wishes for broader access to the discovery laptop, his counsel should discuss the issue with the government, which should consider any reasonable proposals in good faith and work with BOP counsel and MDC staff to effectuate them. In other words, this was about Sean Combs wanting to take legal notes on the laptop. So it looks like he won't be allowed to do that just yet, but he does have access to this laptop at certain times and certain locations. And by the way, I'll also mention regarding Judge Subramanian's recent order, he ordered that the MDC can no longer turn over Sean Combs' attorney visitation forms to the government. And that was an issue. Combs' lawyers argued that the facility shouldn't just send over forms to the prosecutors letting them know when Combs was meeting with his lawyers. The defense even argued that that was privileged. By the way, talking about Sean Combs in the MDC, he's going to be spending his first Christmas behind bars there. And according to People magazine, the meals he will be served on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day include Cornish hen, mac and cheese, baked chicken patty sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, potato chips, fruit. Now you might be saying, doesn't seem all that bad, but remember what Mark Agnifilo told reporters about the MDC.
Describe the conditions of the detention right now.
So it is. The food is inedible, from what I've been told. It's way too hot in the summer. Sometimes there's no heat at all in the winter. The toilet water has been known to freeze. It's violent. Someone like Mr. Combs, might be a target for certain things.
Also, I have some interesting updates about staffing in this criminal case. So first, Damian Williams, remember him, the acting United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York when these charges were first brought against Sean Combs? Well, he has officially resigned from the office, saying, "It is bitter in the sense that I am leaving my dream job. I'm leading an institution I love that is filled with the finest public servants in the world. It is sweet in that I am confident I am leaving at a time when the office is functioning at an incredibly high level, upholding and exceeding its already high standard of excellence, integrity, and independence." So Edward Y. Kim has stepped up as acting United States Attorney, so we will see how this case progresses under Mr. Kim. Also, talking about the prosecution, Marine Ryan Comey, who led the prosecution against Ghislaine Maxwell, has now joined the prosecution team against Sean Combs as well. Remember, she is the daughter of former FBI Director James Comey. And let's not forget, Ghislaine Maxwell's case was a sex trafficking case. So again, good for them to get a prosecutor experienced in these kinds of prosecutions. And finally, one more update for you in Sean Combs' criminal case. Kind of a tangential note, may or may not have an impact or effect on Combs' criminal case, but I want to bring it up nonetheless. So Sean Combs' alleged drug mule, Brendan Paul, who was arrested for cocaine and marijuana possession right after the raids on Combs' properties, apparently won't face any jail time. And this is a guy who was accused in a lawsuit against Combs of being someone who procured drugs and paid off sex workers for Sean Combs. This is from that sexual assault and sex trafficking lawsuit filed by Combs' former producer, Rodney Lil Rod Jones. Well, it turns out, after Paul was arrested at the Miami Opa-locka Executive Airport, allegedly trying to board Combs' private jet and was caught with the drugs, state prosecutors decided to only prosecute him for the cocaine possession, but he was offered a deal. If he completed a drug diversion program, the possession charge would be dropped. And that's an option that's usually given to first-time offenders. And then just this week, 9 months after he was arrested, Paul had his final charge dropped. According to court records, he completed that pretrial diversion program, which included a drug substance abuse course. And it makes me wonder if he had this deal potentially worked out as a way for him to testify against Sean Combs at a criminal trial. We have no evidence to suggest that per se, but if you take allegations from Jones that this guy was involved and around nefarious activities, and of course, sex work and drugs are key elements in this prosecution, makes you wonder. But that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time. Hey, so before we jump into this further, I have an exciting announcement for you guys. The video version of Sidebar is now available on Spotify. That's right, and we are so thankful for your guys' support of Sidebar. Us getting this show on Spotify video is truly due to how loyal this audience is. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, you can now watch and listen on the go, from Diddy to the United Healthcare murder updates to crazy court moments. It's all on Spotify. So right now you can scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description to follow Sidebar on Spotify.